All right. Welcome to this week's FHIR Analytics meeting. So for the agenda for today, let's take a look. So active topics, becoming a FHIR project. We're waiting a little bit, I would say, on Nikolai in terms of some work on the spec. And then we have some more minor stuff that we've talked, the three of us at least, I think in pretty extensive detail. So I don't think there might be too much value in going over that. There is also, yeah, moving along with the FHIR Analytics Conference. But yeah, it's kind of open season. I don't have anything particular to talk about. I did some work on the spec itself, enhancing the intro page to expand just from view definition to also add the API and also add the library-based query resource. I worked on it a little bit today, so nothing major, just starting to introduce that in the narrative section. I think some more work to do there. I'll try to fill that out a little bit more. We may, as I was writing it, want to have a more comprehensive example on the homepage because that's really the place where we kind of walk folks through the narrative. So I don't know what people think, but that was a thought that struck me. And maybe have an example of the query library resource, have an example of API use, just at that high level, kind of the tutorial version. I think that might be useful. But other than that, that's my update. I'm working with Daniil. We are relatively close to the marketing launch for the conference. I think said he had some post FHIR camp things to work on this week, but he's finishing up kind of the finishing touches on the marketing launch. He's going to update the website. I think we're pretty close to having descriptions, titles for most people's presentations, but we're waiting on a couple folks. And I'm certainly here, and other folks are certainly here to help folks out in terms of scoping that or focusing in on presentations. We did that last year for a couple of folks, and yeah, always happy to help review people's work as well. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. You should start seeing some content going out, like I said, next week. That's pretty much it for me. How about you, John?
So I really the only work I've done this week is I've done some work with Graham. So we've actually merged those changes into the FHIR core repository to run the SQL and FHIR test there. But we haven't gotten past the problem of actually enabling like GitHub pages on that repository and publishing the reports somewhere that they can actually get picked up by the SQL and FHIR website and all that sort of stuff. And there are some failing tests, which I don't think is a problem actually. I think we should just publish it warts and all, and then iteratively just go through and fix them. But like some of them were, like it doesn't surprise me that the boundary tests are failing and all the rest, and a few others. So I'm gonna hopefully get that over the line this next coming week, and then we'll actually have some results coming through from FHIR core.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw some activity there. That looks good. Yeah, I agree. Folks chime in. Yeah, I think it's an iterative process. We know that some of the criteria will be quite challenging, right? And so I think that's fine. I think it's more important to sort of get it in and keep progressing on that. Okay, that sounds good. Steve, on your plate, taking a look, did we have any items for you? I think you're all done.
Yeah, I'm just now focusing on the presentation itself. So I've got plenty of time. So I've started working on that here and there. Not too heavily yet, but I should be ready.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's not. I mean, we don't have
It's a half hour. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think it's if you're giving me a half hour, right? I think that's what I saw on the agenda.
Yeah, everyone has a half hour.
That's plenty for me.
Okay. I think everybody has a half hour. We kept them pretty, I mean, so that, definitely leave time for question and answers, at least 5 minutes, I would say. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could go shorter. Like we're not we're not against it. But I mean, you can get into the weeds, right? Like you could
Yeah.
have some kind of optionality where I was just thinking about it this morning. I think what we'll do is do a online connectathon style thing where we have, I think Daniil is going to be kind of like on all the calls. I mean, I'll be on all the calls as well, but we'll have one person who has like the background and they'll change like the background color to give people ideas of time. I always struggle with that. So we're gonna, this was a learning from last year, so we'll use that protocol so you can kind of, speed up, slow down, go into more detail, like have a better sense of the timing. And you could, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know too much about your specific implementation that much, but I think there could be some interesting areas that you could tease out a little bit further because you got Python in there, you got Rust. I don't know if you probably did some code gen. I'm sure you did code gen, right?
Yeah, the Rust code generates Rust code from the
Right.
structure definitions. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think people would be interested in code gen. You know, not that many people are is it backed by Cassandra as well?
This piece is not. Our earlier
Okay.
implementation, which was a Java implementation, was this is actually a databaseless implementation.
Ah, gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's some ideas to throw out. Cool. Yeah, I've also been thinking about my presentation like once in a while. I'll be like, oh, that would be interesting to discuss. I got to write them down. I'm gonna have a refreshed version, but it is gonna come up pretty quickly. So
Yeah,
everybody, now's the time to get
for
started.
sure, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks, Steve. And John, floor is open. Anything you guys want to chat about?
I was just gonna say real quick. Sorry, John, go ahead. I should go in order.
No, you go first.
Yeah, on the whole, I was gonna do something on CQL to SQL converter, which is the fascinating problem that I want to try to see if we can get some movement behind that. I had a conversation with Eval from FHIR actually at the fire camp about it, and he thinks it's a little bit more involved than I think it is, but yeah, let's just say it was an interesting conversation. Being that FHIR already has an ELN to C# converter, and so to take one step further to make it a CQL to SQL converter, I tend to think it's possible and would extend the use case tremendously. So I will try to do a very simple use case in a demo, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that too. Like, it seemed like everybody agreed that's a good use case, but what do you guys think before I go too far into that, and maybe jump over on something else like creating the view definitions for US core or stuff like that?
So when you say to SQL, do you mean to view definitions plus SQL?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're kind of splitting the problem in half. So you're doing something similar to what the NCQA guys were looking at when they were participating in these calls, which is kind of what are the data requirements for the measure or the query or whatever. Create a set of views that satisfy those data requirements, and then create simpler, more portable SQL on top of those views to actually complete the total query.
Correct. Yeah. So still getting utility out of having CQL define the FHIR resources, the logic, the terminology, and then just porting that into, here's a set of FHIR views, view definitions, and then here's the SQL logic. So that's essentially would be like, hey, everybody and their mother can run SQL queries in their reporting analytics frameworks. Nobody can do that in CQL, and it's been taken 3 years now that people are trying to standardize, and it's it's going to be there, but it's always great to offer an alternative for people to actually do the execution in SQL if we can prove it. So I think, yeah, absolutely what you said, John. Yeah, similar. Yeah,
I think it's a great idea, Gene. I think any step, I mean, all this data would be in, people naturally want to have this data in a SQL database anyway. Any step that can be reduced or eliminated is going to greatly simplify the whole process and increase adoption.
yep.
I think it's going to be,
Yeah, and I'm thinking with the query resource that you guys kind of already defined also, that could be the query. Like, there's the query to run. So
Yeah, I definitely like maybe we can get together also, Gene. It can help support at least the kind of thought and presentation work around this. Like, I mean, we've kicked around these ideas, but none of us have really kind of grabbed them with two hands and said like we are going to try and create a proof of concept around it because we're all in some sense working on something else. But I think there's just a really broad interest in it, number one. I mean, it does, I'm sure, there's like a different span. There's a span of viewpoints around like feasibility here for sure. That's not something that you can kind of ignore, but I think it's a question of like, yeah, how do you collapse the problem, right, into
Yeah.
components
So
as first pass?
right. And like my goal would be, it would be really cool to get something like breast cancer screening. And here's the CQL, here's what all the steps that are needed to then enable the SQL version of that, and how every, one of the Lego blocks contributes to that. And then here's us finally running CQL and then SQL at the same time, getting the same result, creating the same measure report with the same output. And then you could see the speed at which SQL runs and the speed at which CQL runs, which is order of magnitude faster and more performant, which is open to all kinds of interpretation, obviously, and your
Yeah.
constraints on your environment. But like, yeah, that would be a great demo if I could make that happen. But obviously, that might be a little bit too much for what is it? What we have 1 month to make this happen.
Yeah, it actually has like I don't know where the time went, honestly, in the past like 2 months, 3 months. Like it's gone, it's vaporized. But
Yeah.
yeah, like in a demo
Yeah.
form.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically going to come down to like how much I can vibe code with Claude Code on the weekends and get away with and see where I get to. I don't know. As soon as I have something, I can share the Git repo though. So
Even if it's incomplete, Gene, I think people
Yeah.
will sometimes if something's incomplete, you'll get more people that want to get involved to help
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. I almost want to like just even hear people's reaction and like feedback of like, yeah, we think this is a really great idea if we would have had this, So that's kind of part of it, is even like just getting the feedback and the reaction from people on that.
Yeah, and I mean it's you have to acknowledge the fact that it's like quite ambitious, right? Like I think
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
starting point because
yeah.
the only, and this may not be 100% accurate because I don't have a grasp of every single approach people have taken to CQL, but like the only other, and again, like asterisks against this, like the only other like really viable approach, and I'm trying to think if this is actually correct or not, but like at least publicly known, right, viable approach, alternative approach to CQL execution has been the like NCQA/FHIR/open source C# approach, right? Like you have the reference implementation approach, right? And you have that approach. And do you guys know of another architectural or language specific approach that folks have taken to CQL execution? Because in my mind, there's those two. There's Blaze, which I don't really understand.
So you're talking about literal, here's some SQL, here's some data, execute it.
Well, I'm talking about the
That's-
end to end, but these are
Yeah.
transpilation approaches. Like the C# approach, Firely NCQA C# approach is a transpilation approach, right?
But the other sort of really common thing is for people to just human translate CQL into SQL that matches their particular tech stack, right? Which
Right.
is
Yeah, that is true. And now a lot of people
possibly
are
the most
using
common execution engine is humans.
human translation in your brain engine. I can't comment specifically, but our organization recently had a project with that did that plus some of the LLM tools, right? So it's like human augmented transpilation, right? So if and that has the benefit of there's no intermediate, right? And the downside of like no intermediate language, right? So like that also it's the execution environment too, right? So if it was just CQL straight to SQL, you don't have the intermediate environment, and then you don't have the like this is the reason why the NCQA approach they took it that way was to have a full C sharp .NET debugging environment, right? And use the C sharp execution environment that they could really use all of that tool chain. If you're just going from CQL to SQL directly, you have stuff in SQL land, but you don't have anything else really. Like you don't have a IDE necessarily with a debugger, and you can't set a breakpoint, right? So I'm just curious if you guys knew of any other approach.
I'm not aware of any other technical approach than the one you guys are mentioning, but I'm aware of, I don't know if you're following the sort of jobs to be done framework. A lot of the CQL work is for the quality measures, right? But there are other uses of CQL that I've bumped into. The work that we've done in healthcare analytics generally, some of I would call them forward thinking, like, chief medical informatics officers. Like one in particular I was speaking to, it's probably last year sometime. He said, I'm just sort of tired of getting a project and then having to figure out the data model and it would be great to sort of unify this work on a common data model, like FHIR and something like CQL, so that I could speed up the velocity of these projects that are coming in. So I think there's other use cases for this sort of collection of technologies beyond just quality reporting.
Yeah, there's also like prior auth uses
Prior,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, and in our experience, we've seen it in just like clinical practice guidelines in particular. So more interact all the way down to, delivery. So more interactive questionnaires. That's a space that we tend to work in and think about more than measures. So yeah, it's got use. I'm of the mind that more independent implementations of transpilers or like AI-driven translators, kind of more is better in my view here, right? I think we just have it's a little bit of a limiting factor, I think, for the whole industry right now, because although I guess there's definitely some that are private, right, inside organizations, but that doesn't really benefit the industry that much as a whole.
Yeah, right.
So, okay, cool. But Gene, yeah, I think everyone's going to be excited about this work. So hopefully you'll be able to put some time behind it. We're happy to help as well.
Thank you.
Cool. All right.
Yeah,
go
like a great way to make sure the work gets done is to just commit to work you haven't done in a presentation, and then you have to do it by the time that you have to present it. So it's
that's how it is. Totally get it.
Yeah, that's a great forcing function, as we say, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like your wife telling you to do your laundry, and it's like you just commit. Yeah, babe, I'm gonna do it. That way you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice, right?
Yeah, you're committing to it. I'm actually thinking like we might not be able to get the milestone release done, actually, like depending on how much bandwidth all of us have. I know I'm not gonna have a ton, so I think that's okay. Like we can say like coming this month or something like that. But all right, see you, Gene. Yeah, I don't know if we can make a hard commitment.
Yeah, I think we're close, but I don't think I don't think it matters too much if we don't have a finalized thing. Yeah, plus like what does that mean now that we're talking about the whole thing?
Yeah, it's a good point. Oh, well, I mean, Gino's recommendation there, or his advice was it's fine to give names, right, to a certain release that are kind of unofficial, but then that doesn't interact, so to speak, with the formalized ballot process. So I think we're on safe ground there. And I mean, we shouldn't stress too much. Like we're all busy and have other work to do. So we can claim that like the exciting new functionality of, 2.1 is coming very soon, right? Like soon after. So we can announce and then release a little bit later. I don't think this is a problem.
Cool, yeah. So we're actually tomorrow we're doing a bit of a conversational interoperability hack day internally here at CSIRO, like kind of similar to what Josh did at the recent working group meetings. So we've got like our own little instance of BanterOp running on the internal network, and we're like getting everybody sort of from across the lab to sort of think about how they could expose all the different things that they do as agents, and think about scenarios where these things work together and all the rest of it. Because at the very least, it's a really cool, it's like a fun way to kind of collaborate and all the rest. But the ones that I'm doing kind of in preparation for it are like, the first one is like a PBS claiming one, which is kind of the most similar to a lot of the ones that have been kind of demoed from the US space previously, because a lot of them are kind of insurance related and all the rest of it. So PBS is our pharmaceutical benefits scheme, and medications are subsidized by the government, but only according to a bunch of complicated rules and all the rest of it. So you need to kind of combine patient data and like history and diagnostic investigations and medication history with like a set of rules to figure out if they're eligible for subsidies on particular medicines and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of that's the most boring one. The second one is a scenario where a GP has used an AI scribe to capture narrative about an encounter, and they need help to convert it into like a structured format, and so that it can be shared. So like, take this narrative, an agent converts it into FHIR, basically gives it back, and that gets fed back to the human and they validate it, and then it kind of gets piped into a FHIR server somewhere. So that's kind of the interaction. And the third one, which is the most relevant to this call, is the analytics one, where and there's lots of different scenarios in this, but the one that I've picked is like an antimicrobial resistance one, and it's like, get some sort of analytic question, like it might be, give me an updated antibiogram based on this new product being available in the hospital, whatever. And the other agent has access to a data set and tools, right? So in this case, that I've created like an MCP server over Pathling, so that it has Mimic and a set of view definitions over Mimic. And then the agent can basically just run SQL over those view definitions and run, R and get visualizations and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's really fun anyway. And what Jean was talking about, the thing that we have now that we didn't have when we first started talking about this problem is AI, really. Well, not to the extent that we have it now. And I guess the hypothesis is, is it easier to do this if you split the problem in half? Because you were talking, Arjun, about, can you just say, here's this HEDIS measure, give me some Postgres, or give me some, Oracle, SQL. So the hypothesis is, can you do better than that if you sort of say, well, first of all, like, give me a set of view definitions, and then second of all, give me like some SQL over the top of that. And can AI help us to do that, automate that over the huge number of sort of measures and complexity and all the rest of it. So that when you were talking about that, I was thinking that would be another cool, maybe not just a single agent, but maybe like a team of agents, because there's different parts of that problem which you could sort of carve up, right? Like, so one of them's like a CQL to, data requirement or view definition sort of task. And then there's the task of running SQL overview definitions, which I think we've already got a fair bit of experience with. And I think we've observed that works pretty well. even for complicated stuff. And yeah, then it comes to, you know, how do you represent that context, you know, so that the LLM can effectively sort of understand, you know, so yeah, what does it need to be able to go from either a natural language measure or CQL or both, and all that sort of thing. So you could definitely play around with all that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and your hackathon project's on really cool, by the way. Question on that before we talk about the other thing. Are you using local models, like a open source, like locally deployable LLMs, or are you, going out to Claude or ChatGPT or a mix?
So a range. So
Mm,
we're not locally deploying anything, but we are using some locally deployable models, if that makes sense. So I'm just
mm,
using Open Router with
mm,
a range of different things and checking it out. Like one of the ones that Josh was using quite heavily in his demonstrations was GPT OSS through Open Router, which is something that you could deploy locally, but
mm.
you can also sort of just sub in, you know, Sonnet or GPT-5 or whatever, and see if that improves that performance. But yeah, it's super convenient to just plug into Open Router, and you can use anything you like pretty much. You can try the whole spectrum.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I was looking at that, some projects that we're thinking about, but definitely, I think that's a big cut, right? Like that's a big distinction between, the frontier models and frontier capabilities and what you can deploy. Sorry, my dog is now really, really wants to put her head on my knee. So you can see she's like, I must be right here. And I'm like, you're gonna hurt yourself because I have to put my computer on your head now. I'm gonna have to move. But yeah, that's one thing I'm thinking about, because there's frontier model performance, right? But if taking some organization's intellectual property and shipping it off across the internet someplace to a frontier model or even a hosted model, there's still a lot of pushback with that. Totally understandable from my point of view, given how those organizations have dealt with intellectual property at this point. So that's definitely something I'm thinking about. And then yeah, just the CQL ecosystem as a whole, right? Like where I don't think anybody, maybe people are doing this and I'm not aware because I can't keep up with like the million things that people are doing. Like I know this was not the trend, and I won't speak for everybody, but for the past couple of years, right? It was we are gonna have human beings augment them with tools. They have to be extremely well verified. We're gonna have extensive test suites. That all makes sense, but it's kind of a pre-LLM way of looking at this.
Well, I don't know.
It,
I don't know
I'm not saying you jump to
that has
LLM, but like
changed too much.
I don't think it has because the organizations that do this necessarily, I won't speak for my former employer, but like it's evolving so rapidly, like even LLMs in-house. I have no insight into what's going on there. So, I mean, like there's nothing I could reveal because I don't know. Definitely parts of that workflow, you could see LM automation being really helpful testing, right? For instance. But, what's the value of like the complete, like kind of going a step beyond LLMs producing assets in parts of this workflow to like, I'm thinking of like let an LM write like a new high performance CQL engine, right?
I don't think there is any complete thing. Like I don't think there's any situation where the LLM just automates the whole thing. I think it's
Right.
all human augmentation. It's just a matter of how good the tools are, really. So like we used to have we had non-AI tools, now we've got AI tools, and all it
Yeah.
is a tool that is better, really. It's still a human that is doing this thing basically. And so if it was to translate a HEDIS measure, if it was to write a whole new engine, it's still a task that a human's going to be responsible for, but it's a matter of how productive that human is. Like if they can
Mm.
do that task 200% faster. I mean, that's a big deal, right? Because, you know, something that was previously not feasible to do, maybe suddenly it is feasible. It might still be a big job, but it's not an impossible job, you know. So yeah, but I'm seeing that like everywhere. You can even see by the sort of scale and ambition of open source projects coming out these days and everything, the cost of producing software has drastically reduced, and so things are becoming more feasible. You know, like for example, someone, you know, saying, "Oh, we're going to build a new browser engine," you know, like that's a massive engineering effort to build it in 2025. You know, build a from the ground up a new web browser engine. But you know, is it though? If you've got all these other engines or they already exist, you've got AI to help you, you've got and you can accelerate that potentially, and suddenly things that weren't feasible before, maybe it's still a huge job, but now it maybe comes into the frame. I think it's the same in this stuff, you know. It's really just better tools though. It's not replacing anyone, I don't think.
I'm gonna say, John, like save this up for the round table at the end of our conference, because we're gonna have some like John's. I'm trying to be funny, like, but this would be a great conversation for the round table. Like, what's the impact here, and you know, how we see this, particularly in the context of things like CQL. But yeah, I agree to a broad, you know, to a pretty strong degree with what you're saying. Like, I think it's all human augmentation, but like then there's all these like second order effects, right? Like if production of software becomes much cheaper and there's much more of it, the volume basically expands exponentially. Like you start to devalue it, right? Like it doesn't become this like rare commodity anymore. That's a question. And then, you know, in my mind, it's like how extreme do you want to go, right? Like you start from like some level of human augmentation all the way to like it's like, you know, less and less human, right? And you're also losing something, right? You're gaining productivity potentially, but like, are you actually losing productivity because the output is terrible or unknowable, right? So yeah, I think these are
I
really
think
good questions.
it shifts emphasis onto certain things, you know, like the ability to test and validate these things. Like we can kind of get a bit lazy when we do things ourselves, but when we start to automate them, these things become much more important because it's a critical enabler for us automating more and more. So, you know, if you could, for example, like verify that you could convert this HEDIS measure into this set of data requirements and this set of view definitions, and you could verify that that answer is correct per the original definition of these things. You know, like we probably haven't invested a lot of time in that, but then if you want to automate that, that becomes really important. And so you create that whole tool chain to do that. And then you actually create this capability to a very high level of certainty, verify that regardless of whether an AI or a human does it, right? And that becomes really quite valuable in itself. And then once you have that, you know, it actually, you can automate it quite a lot and have a high level of certainty that because you can measure the quality of what you're getting out. So I think the fact that we're doing this more actually means that we're spending a lot more time on that infrastructure, like outcomes-based sort of assessment of what we're producing with AI, which than we were when we were manually coding things, you know. Like, of course, we do testing and all that sort of stuff, but testing is now like maybe 2 or 3 times more important, you know, so we're actually focusing on that rather than focusing on the code itself, because the code, once you've know how to assess the answer, you can generate the code in minutes or hours. You could throw it away, generate new code. It really, all that matters is does the code work, right?
Right.
You know, so I think that's an interesting sort of effect of this.
Yeah, I believe that pretty strongly too. Let that like the whole all of this pivots on evaluation, right? And evaluation is one place that AI-driven code generation is there's essentially no downside, right? Because you probably weren't going to do it to that level in a manual fashion. So you're it's essentially all profit, right? But it's also critical, like you said. Like without that, it's much more difficult to build certainty in the things in the code that you automate, and then you can just automate away, right? Obviously, all this has nuance, right? It's not these are all
Yeah.
trade-offs, but you can make that's like a new trade-off that you can make. That's particularly powerful. Steve?
Yeah, you guys are talking about sort of the bucket of precision requirements in these systems, and we've run into the same thing where I was in the middle of doing all the work for the view definition stuff, and somebody was introduced to me and said, because they knew we do work in the analytics space, and he was, to my surprise, he was running like analytic questions directly off of a whole pile of FHIR data in JSON and in ND-JSON format, directly using some strange techniques with that involved an LLM, and that's it. And I said, this is a little dangerous. I mean, and he said that this is okay for our client because they want to ask sort of general questions about the data, roughly how many people, had this condition last month that that exited the hospital, right? And it was not a requirement to be super accurate. They want to know roughly was a keyword. So for them that was okay, but still to me I was like, well, there are ways of getting an exact number, and they said that's okay. We can do that. There's another project that I was involved in where it's a summarization of using an LLM of a patient's record. Give me a paragraph on what this patient's record's all about. What they're, roughly what are their conditions, right? And those kinds of projects are being somewhat successful, but that's not where we're trying to operate. We're trying to operate in the space of, for every time, this condition, this diagnosis happens, we want to make sure X, Y, and Z happens every time. And if we have a failure, then of identifying that, then that's an area where somebody could get hurt, right? So I think it has all everything to do with precision, and there are cases where when you need to be very, very precise, and there are cases when it's okay to be imprecise.
Yeah. See, another great this would have been a great roundtable topic, right?
Hey,
Like honestly, yeah, I'm
we
writing
can do
these
it again.
down.
Okay, great.
I'm on the
We have
hook
a
for
roundtable every week.
we
Yeah,
have
right.
this is like a yeah, people show up. You get, roundtable for free. But no, these are great like broader spectrum ideas, right? Like and they're in the context of fire analytics and SQL and Fire. I really like that characterization that you made about how, precision was really critical here. And if I were to add to that, it would be what I would love to see is a real diversity of use cases at different levels of precision, right? Because not, this wasn't intentional or anything like that, but a lot of the folks and organizations that are driving analytics on Fire and CQL are correctly fundamentally highest precision possible, right? Like extreme levels of precision. HEDIS being one, but also, CPGs, medical risk, right? Like you're talking about like where precision is critical. And so you can kind of start on really one end of a continuum, but that's not the entire and it has its particular issues, right? Problems to solve, trade-offs, but there's a whole continuum that maybe in the lower precision end of the scale, you're talking about, I want to know about trends, right? I want to do marketing, right?
Mhm.
I'm just making things up, right?
Yeah.
Where like if you don't send that email, right, that's okay, right? And there are elements of healthcare that are like that, where you don't need the ultimate level and standard of precision. And it'd be wonderful to take a look and think about the systems and the trade-offs you could use there, particularly in AI. So I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I think that you can be augmented with an LLM to achieve greater precision, not less precision, because it's a partnership thing, and it's never going to be a non-human thing, especially in these use cases we're talking about. But like there's lots of ways that LLMs can augment you to do those jobs better or more efficiently, right? So like if it's all about like querying a data set, with precision, I mean that is that's a really broad thing, and you can create a correct answer, but that's contingent on you making the right assumptions in the first place, right? And having thought about all the different factors that you need to put into that. So, like first task for that might be a really exhaustive data analysis of the data set. What are all the values that occur in this data set? What is the quality of it? What's the prevalence of missing data? All this sort of stuff. If all that work has got to be done first before you can actually say, well, okay, this is going to be my final query, and we've got high confidence that this is going to give us the right answer, whatever. So there's all that, there's heaps of work there, but that's work that you can get AI to help you with. And, and therefore, I think potentially do a more complete job of it, because, people are not perfect. They're never going to search in every nook and cranny and do a 100% exhaustive job of anything. And I think having augmentation actually helps them to be more to do that in a more complete way. I think it's similar to like it's similar to coding, like it's really important that our code works and that we've got it correct, right? I think that having LLM as a coding partner has the potential to improve the quality of the code, because it actually forces you to take 2 steps back and think, what do I want to achieve with this? Because what does the architecture look like? Because it's super tempting to just dive in and just start coding or just start writing queries or whatever. But if you're doing it with LLM as a partner, you kind of have to think at a slightly higher level in order for that to be effective, which I think is not a bad thing, actually. But as you say, it all comes down to the way you use the tools, right? Like, and I don't think that's necessarily specific to AI, right? Like we've got lots of other smart tools that we can use, but it's just not appropriate to use them in certain ways. And that comes down to how good you are with the tools, and and everyone's still kind of learning to use these new tools as well. So we're not that good at it yet, but I think we're going to get much better at it, and that's probably going to improve again, how effective we are at using them and using them safely and appropriately and all that sort of stuff. But I'm bullish.
Cool. You are. And I'm bullish too. I mean, I don't think they're gonna become, I don't know, sentient overlords, but I could be wrong about that.
But some people do think they are. They're headed that way. I don't think that'll happen either. I still see them as tools, but
Yeah.
some people are hyping them up to do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm also think from an economic perspective, there's probably going to be some disappointment soon, but I don't know when. But
that will be interesting too. If enough people are going to be losing their jobs because of AI, who's going to be operating the AI?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you saw the news today, but there's
30,000,
tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon 30,000, a couple of companies. I think there's an insurance company. It was half its workforce. It's pretty get pretty grim. But as a tool, yeah, I'm pretty bullish too in the augmentation way that John describes. I don't know. I think there's going to be secondary factors too, because it's really tempting as well to not be as diligent as John is approaching it and be make me a sandwich. And, and then you start to get at the ideas of like, at what level do you need to describe, right, the task that you're doing, or not going to put in that effort, kind of just accept what comes back. Like, I can't say that I'm not guilty of doing that in some work that I was doing recently. And then you might like lose or sort of take the easy path and skip over some skills. Like, I think we're talking about both sides of that coin, John, right? Like, that is possible, but also the augmentation of evaluation is possible too, right? Although I'm kind of sick of reading really long documentation like READMEs that are like 15 pages long at this point. It's just like going. It's like taking me longer to read the README than to evaluate the PR at this point. We're suggesting to our developers to add user prompt saying like, please be concise, right? Like, it's too much. Anyway, yeah, this is at least giving me lots of good fodder for the roundtable, so I'm excited for that. Cool. All right, we're at time, a little over actually. So, but fun as always chatting with you guys. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
Have a good one. Talk to you later.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye.